Hi guys and welcome back to another Apex Racing Academy setup tutorial. It's Alex Simpson. We are here with the brand new Dallara P217 LMP2 prototype, and this is part two of our three-part series where we're going to be talking about how to set this up, what all the settings do, and where they will affect the car. If you haven't seen part one, please go check that out. That one is all about tires and aerodynamics. We're going to be focusing in mainly on the chassis today, and then the final part of the video will be the brakes and the drivetrain unit as well. Um, so yeah, sorry. Just literally thinking like, where do we start with this thing? This is such a monster. If you have got it set up already, great. If you're an academy member, that will be the case. You'll have one of the coaches' setups. Johan Half at the moment doing the setups for this car. If you are not a academy member, you can still take any of the iRacing setups and use what I'm about to tell you to fine tune it to your driving style. And this is what this video is for, whether you are an academy member or whether you're just a regular iRacer from the forum that's watching this video or YouTube and you just want help. This is about how to fine tune from somebody else's setup. So you're happy that the setup is kind of okay, but you just want to optimize it just to your liking a little bit more. Maybe it's got a bit too much oversteer in some corners, or a bit understeer, or it's a bit slow in the straight line. This is what this series is all about. So it gives you with the tires. We're very in depth about how to set them up from a build change. So like if I recently changed the tire model on us, your old preferred setup that you used to love, how do you get that dialed back in if they completely change the tires? You can kind of follow that. And this one, we're going to be focusing much more on the suspension. Now, for almost every aspect, this looks to me as if we are dealing with basically an F1 car. So there are so many settings on here that we used to deal with when we used to drive the two F1s back in the day in the iRacing World Championship Grand Prix series. So don't think anything particularly new on it. The only difference is those cars didn't have the high and low speed dampers. So that's something else that we've got to discuss today. So yeah, we're going to start off today. We're going to talk about the front end, the third spring. Then we're going to talk about the just the suspension on the left and the right. Same with front and back. Then we're going to switch to the rear on the third spring, and then we're going to come all the way back and talk about the dampers, because dampers need their own sort of section because they do work concurrently with each other. Right. So yes, if you want any questions answering after this video, please post them in the comments or on the iRacing forum. If you're an Academy member, you're free to ask us in Discord or grab us in when we're on voice comms or in one of our hosted sessions that we do. Grab us there and we will answer away. Right, let's jump straight into it then. And get yourself ready, guys. This one, like I say, this one might take some time. So, a third spring. First off, what is a third spring? So, with most sort of traditional, sort of like sort of GT cars or tin top cars, you normally have like a shock absorber attached to the chassis, and then like a wishbone or something like that. So you have four of them, front and back. And that's what we traditionally have. Now, a third spring sits kind of in the middle of the car here, and will be attached to normally like your torsion bars of the circuit. So one spring to kind of control um, the um, the way the suspension kind of moves on that. The torsion bars themselves do have um, like an outer diameter, which is kind of like a stiffness as well. So they kind of work as an independent shock on their own right. But the third spring is very much what we would class as our typical suspension in the front. Yeah, so at some point I'll redo all these videos with some decent graphics, I think, like that, and kind of really get into the nitty gritty. I mean, they could be hours long. It's a crazy topic. Um, but yeah, so essentially we are going to control the car the, like you would any shock. But it also affects ride height on the car too, just like any shock does. So yeah, just let's just think of it as like any other shock, but it's attached to both sides at the same time. So we have a stiffness in that, and a softer torsion bar. Sorry, a softer third spring will give you more grip, more mid-corner grip. That's where I should elaborate as well. And with more grip, because it's the front of the car, we get more rotation. So if you want more if you want more turn in the middle of the corner, then typically a third spring here, a softer third spring will help. A stiffer, it has the opposite effect. We have less grip, so we have less rotation. So if you want more turn, um, and when we're talking about springs, it affects more the lower speed corners than the higher speed. You won't really notice it in a mid speed corner or high speed corner. That is much more about aerodynamics than it is about suspension. Um, Even with a GT car, it's more about aerodynamics and amount of rake and things like that we have in the car rather than the suspension. So yeah, if it's a slower speed corner, then this can help perhaps with a bit of extra rotation through the middle of the corner. But be mindful, with it being the third spring and attached in the middle, it does affect the way the car is sort of the ride height of the car as well. So if I if I just load up the baseline setup again, you see it was at 230 and we've got a front ride height of 45. Now, in theory, if I drop this down to 130, should change it. It does, not a huge amount actually. That does actually quite surprise me. I thought it was going to be a bit more severe than that. But still, it does change our ride heights as well. And more specifically, it's going to change our ride height at speed as well. So if we make this front end much softer, now if you note in the first video that we talked about ride heights at speed, so definitely worth watching that one back again, because we haven't got quite the strength in the spring anymore to keep this car up in the air when we're going down a straight at 180 miles an hour because of the air pushing on it. It will sink the splitter closer to the ground on the front end, and suddenly we will have a higher rake angle on the car, and that will introduce a fair amount more turn on the aerodynamics. So if when you adjust this setting and you go, well, Alex told me it wasn't going to affect the middle and high speed of corners with changing this, and he's talking nonsense. Well, it's actually not affecting you. It's the fact that the car is the front end of the car is now lower going into these high speed corners because of the speed you're carrying and the basically the air pushing the car down, and the spring not to be able to hold it up. So if you go a lot softer, you may find that actually you need to adjust your ride height back up to compensate for the fact that it's substantially lower now going into some of these medium and high speed corners. Um, I- in terms of how much, I'm afraid that is where you get into your advanced classes, where you'd need to check your VRS or your Motec and things like that, and look at the differences in the ride height um, going into those particular corners. If it's 1 or 2 mil lower, then maybe you need to come up 1 or 2 mil on the suspension to compensate for it. But yeah, it's like you say, just take a little look at the differences. That's all we'll do. We won't show it on screen, I'm afraid, but there's your clue as to kind of what to do so that you know to come back in here and try and rework out what you need to do with the front suspension and ride heights. Your third perch offset is a way of controlling ride height as well. So you can see I can change this here and it adjusts the ride heights evenly front to left rather than having to do each side. So if you, for example, where we did change the ride height. It was at 45 mil before. Let's say we just wanted to get it back to 45 mil. So at least in the garage, it was kind of the same. Then we can do that using the third spring offset. Now it does change the deflection. And as we saw in the last video, I think there may be um, a limit to how far we can go. There you go. Just the same as before. Anything under 1, and we're going to get an invalid um, rate on that. So keep that in mind when you do use this adjustment here to change that. It's going to affect with fuel over the long run, and it may invalidate. And if that does invalidate, then we need to use these torsion bar turns to adjust the ride heights instead. So like you say, I can knock it back down or raise it back up one way or the other with using the torsion bar turns. So that's how you can adjust the ride height after changing the spring. So yeah, softer, more rotation, stiffer, less rotation. Stiffer car will give you more responsive car in high speed and change of directions, mind you. So that needs to be taken into consideration as well. Your anti-roll bar size. So we've got an anti-roll bar, we've got a disconnected, soft, medium, and stiff. And then we've got blades as well. I will just quickly double check stiff. Yeah, I know the stiffer, but which one is right? Yeah, okay. So P1 is the softest, or is the um, shortest as well. So yes. So yeah, P1 soft, P5 is stiff. Now the way the anti-roll bar works is these are micro adjustments. These are major adjustments. So a soft P1 is a very soft anti-roll bar. The next setting up on that is a P2 and then a P3, P4, P5. Yeah. Once we get to a soft P6, the next setting above that is a medium P1. And we keep going until we go higher. If we take the anti-roll bar off and we disconnect it, then the blades don't do anything either. So that is kind of off. So when we're at a P1 soft, if we want more rotation or a bit more grip kind of in those corners, all we can do at that point is disconnect it and that will turn it off. And it will give us more rotation and more grip. It will affect the way the camber works on the car, though, so be mindful of that. You might have to do some larger amounts of camber changes based on the anti-roll bar. So typically, an anti-roll bar, a softer anti-roll bar, will be much the same as the third spring. It will give you more rotation mid-corner in those sort of slower corners, and a stiffer, so a higher setting, will give you less rotation. So if you're oversteering, you're going to want to go up on this. If you're understeering, you're going to want to go down on this setting. Much the same as the torsion, as the third spring, sorry, it can also affect the way the car responds, the speed it reacts as well. So for a very, if you find that the car's too lazy going into a corner, into like a high speed corner, then maybe you can just stiffen up this anti-roll bar and it'll be a bit more responsive to turn in. Sometimes you can understeer on the initial part of the corner and have oversteer through the middle because you've got a softer bar. So, it feels like you've got understeer, then suddenly you've got oversteer halfway through. And actually stiffening the bar up will mean that the car will react a bit better. It will have the right amount of rotation through the middle of the corner so that you're not fighting the car at all. It's just much smoother throughout the corner. The front toe in, front toe in works just the same as the rear, but I'll talk about them independently. We with every car on iRacing, it's very important to not let the tires overheat, and towing is one way that can cause a lot of heat very, very quickly. If you have a very high positive setting, you will notice the heat build up quite quickly, and the tires will fall off very quickly. We tend to work within a range of probably +2 to -2 on our setups, I would say. That's probably fair. Any higher on -2, we also get a bit of excess heat wear over a long run that we want to try and avoid. So we're trying to stay within this operating window. Now, when we run a negative toe setting, you'll tend to find the car turns in just a little bit better. When we run a positive, it will turn in slightly less. So if it's just if, again on that initial turning, if it's getting just a bit too much over rotation, maybe bring this setting closer towards zero. Zero is the sweet spot in terms of tire life. You will hold on to the tires a lot longer with a zero. So try and build your sets around a zero toe in, and then fine tune from there. Yeah, if you want more turn, like you say, more negative, less turn into the positives. Power steering assist is kind of what it says on there. This will basically just reduce your force feedback feeling. Obviously, there's lots of loads go through this car, so that's why they have power steering, just like Formula One cars do. And if when you're holding on to the car through, say, like your Blanchimons, for example, or your Puons or Eau Rouge, and the force feedback, you're like, for God's sake, this is so ridiculously high. I have got to turn it down. Then instead of turning your force feedback down so you don't get any feel anymore, what you can do is you can just turn up your power steering assist. It won't take away any of the feel of the wheel. That will still be all there. You'll still feel everything, so you'll know that you're kind of set correctly there. But what it will do is it will just take off that horrible weight of the wheel that's perhaps hurting your hands a little bit too much. Yeah, so useful for that. Steering ratio as well. So that will be basically your how much steering lock you put in terms of how much it actually steers. Now this will be kind of like a personal preference, and I would imagine um, you, once you start driving the car, you'll get a setup and you will get used to it, and then you won't be able to drive with anything else because it will just feel weird. Because you'll be turning, and suddenly the car will have more steering lock on it than what you necessarily had, and yeah, so you'll be scrubbing the tires too much in some of the corners because steering lock ratio. So do check that when you get given a setup. If you've been typically driving with, say, like the default 11.0, and suddenly someone gives you one with, I mean, it looks like there's we've got what, well, we can go up to 12 and we can go down to 9.5. So yeah, if someone gives you something like 9.5 and it all feels like the car's not turning, well, maybe that's just because actually you're not steering quite as much. So go back to rechange this to like the 11.0. The display page is that's kind of on the dash, and you've got the different settings that you can tweak there. Right, let's talk a little bit about the suspension. Then we'll talk um, about all of them in kind of almost. No, we won't. No, we won't, because one's torsions and one is a shock and a spring. So we have a torsion bar turns. Now this really directly um, affects the ride height of the car. You can see every time I change it, it's kind of do that. Let's use these to get ourselves back down to sort of 45 millimeters. So that's what we can do to change the ride heights. And like I say, you want to use the ride heights in conjunction with the perch offset to make sure you keep this legal with the third spring deflection, and get your right ride height that you want. Now, the torsion bar outer diameter is basically how stiff the torsion bars are, and they work in exactly the same um, method as the third spring. Sorry, I sound not very convinced, but yep, trust me, they do. Uh, so yeah, you've got an 18 millimeter. I'm just actually trying to see whether or not iRacing necessarily state which is the strongest, which is the stiffest, and which is the softest. So I'm thinking the longer ones are going to be softer. Right. The one way to tell is the ride height should drop um, when we apply that. Okay, it's not. It's gone up. So, hmm, yep, definitely gone up, and that's gone down. Just quick. Let me just double check. See what it says. How stiff the spring is to get the same ride heights after a spring change. The spring patch must be adjusted. Yes, we know that. Stiffer springs control the chassis attitude better, which is good for aerodynamics. Yeah, great. Better for camber control. Yeah, also good. But mechanical grip is often better with soft. Yes, great. And in typical iRacing fashion, they don't actually tell us which one is softer and which one is stiffer. Normally, you would presume the setting at the top is the softest because that's how they do it, and the one at the bottom is the stiffest. Um, Oh, I did not want to press dump. But it looks to be like it's the other way around. So keep that in mind. So little pro tip for you right now. Yeah, it looks to me then. So a stiffer um, torsion outer diameter is the bigger diameter. That would make sense because it's much more like an anti-roll bar, I think, than an actual spring. But yeah, it's kind of yeah, it's just weird. They've just everything's the wrong way. Usually, everything on iRacing at the top is the lowest setting, and at the bottom is the highest setting. But they have yep, they've changed it around. So okay. So stiffest setting, softest setting, and it will affect your ride height. So where were we as default? Was it 15.14? Back to our yeah. Okay. So like any shock or spring or anything like that, the softer you have them, the more grip you will get in the middle of the corner. Just like the anti-roll bar that I spoke about at the start and the third spring, mechanical grip is more you can more notice it at a slower speed than you can at a higher speed, but it will affect the ride heights the same. So if you change these settings, you're going to have to change um, your torsion bar offsets to kind of get back to your 45 that you can't quite get it spot on, but maybe we can use the third spring. There you go, to get back to an exact 45 millimeters. So there you go. Our way of use both to kind of do that. So now what we have is we actually have a softer front end. So now the car through the middle of the turn will actually turn just a little bit better. So if you have understeer, again, then you're going to want to go towards these settings here. This will give us more grips. If we have oversteer, then we're going to want to go towards the lower end. This will make it a bit stiffer, but we need to adjust the ride heights to compensate on it. Now, the torsion bars will also have an effect on the ride height at speeds. So to do with your rake angle, and with this being a heavy aero car, you really have to pay attention to that. So I strongly advise that you go and check out your VRSs, your Motecs, your Atlases, and see what those ride heights at speeds are doing into some set corners. And with these changes, if it's made a big difference, then you'll need to adjust your ride heights back so that you can get a better balance, or back to the aerodynamic balance that you had that you were kind of happy with before. Um, but it will make less of a change. It won't be as noticeable as the third spring. The third spring is much more about controlling the ride heights than the torsion bars themselves. That's much more about each individual side and how it leans over and things like that. So yeah, but do keep that in mind. Onto the rear of the car, we've got just a traditional spring rate, so it's standard springs at the back, so it looks much more like a shock absorber at the back attached to the wishbone, and just the same as any shock, a lower setting here, assuming they haven't gone and done weird things again. Let's check this. So if we drop this down, what we should see is our ride height change from 42.1 to a lower setting if it's softer. So we'll go down to 110. It applied both at the same time. That's good. And it did change it. So yeah, they haven't messed with us on this particular setting. So to the left is a softer spring. To the right is a stiffer spring. And that will work like any traditional spring does. So a softer one will give us more grip. A stiffer one will give us less grip. So more grip will mean that we shift the balance. Say if this is the front of the car, this is the back, and suddenly we're now producing more grip on the rear. Well, the balance shifts towards the back, so we have more understeer now. So if you change a setting and bring it further to the back and then wonder why it's understeer. And that's kind of why you may need to compensate by softening up something to do with the front, maybe change to the third spring down or the anti-roll bar to kind of get the same rotation back if you're just hunting for grip in general to start off with. If the balance feels good, but you feel like you haven't got enough grip, then what you can do is rebalance the car. So go softer and then come up back to the front and readjust accordingly. So, yeah. If you want more rotation off of a corner, you can use the rear end by stiffening up this suspension. That will absolutely make the car rotate off the corner. So that will give you more rotation, more oversteer. But if you want less oversteer, then you're going to soften up. If you want less oversteer and more grip, then yeah, come down with that as well. And just remember to always reset your ride heights back using um, the spring perch offset. Keep those even, and the torsion, not the torsion, the third spring offset as well, so that um, you can get your right height. Now, of course, I've completely cocked with the car, so this is why we're seeing this cross weight at the moment. So let me just load back up the baseline because obviously I've been clicking everywhere. You always need to remember whatever change you do, we want this cross weight to be 50%. So let's go ahead and just sort of go back to where we were and say, right, okay, so we wanted a bit of a softer front end, check, but we want to maintain our 45mm, check. We want slightly, we wanted a slightly softer torsion. Let's do that. That's also done. We've applied that. Keep down here. Still at 50% check, but we've not got the right ride height. So we've gone to 53.3. Oh, that doesn't matter which way we do it, I think. Looking at that. Oops. That was why I think one of them fell out there, didn't it? So, right. I want 45. Oh, look, can't get. That's an absolute blow, isn't it? So we can't get 45 exactly. Let me go up on that one and then come back down. See if we can get it. Ah, there we go. One way to skin a cat. So, so yeah, we've kind of done those tweaks. Like I said, I'm just doing it to hear for hearsay, but the point is that we've done some tweaks and we've kept this cross weight at 50%. That's the important there. So yeah, so just to reiterate on the rear springs, softer, more grip, less oversteer, stiffer, less grip, more rotation, more oversteer. Camber, obviously, we touched on the last video, how to set that up. Towing on the rear is exactly the same as towing on the front. We've got that kind of like sweet spot between sort of like, -2 and +2. ideally you want 0, and you're going to kind of work from there in terms of getting the balance. More negative will give you more turning, even on the rear, and a more positive will give you less turning as well. The third spring on the rear acts just the same as the front. It's connected in the middle of the two suspension, and it will affect your ride height a fair amount as well. A softer setting here will give you more grip. The more grip we have on the rear, of course, we push the balance back towards the rear. So that's now understeer. Where at the front, of course, a softer one gives us more rotation. We now get less rotation with that. So this is why it's a balancing act. We might want the grip, for example, in coming out of slow speed corners. We might want that grip that a softer torsion will give us. Um, but we must we need to maintain our rotation. So maybe now we need to make the front one a bit softer in order to get the same level of rotation in some of these corners that we had before. Again, you can use the spring perch offset to adjust the ride height. Got to remember we need to stay in a position where we don't invalidate the third spring deflection as well. So we can use the perch offsets to adjust the right. If I can actually click on them. So F1.5, so we're just adjusting the ride heights there as well. Right, let me get them back even. Okay. So yeah, a softer spring, like I say, less rotation, more grip. A stiffer third spring, more rotation, less grip. It will, of course, maintain the ride height. So a stiffer one will mean the rear stays up in the air. So that will maintain your aerodynamic profile. A softer one will allow the car to drop down at the back. So say, for example, you are going down the Kemmel Straight and you keep bottoming out, keep striking the bottom of the car on there, and you can see it slowing you down. Then what you perhaps need to do is you perhaps need to stiffen up the rear of the car, but actually drop the ride heights ever so slightly, because we have now made the car um, higher at speed. We won't bottom out, but of course we don't want to obviously adjust our aerodynamic balance. So just stiffening this up will have an adverse effect on your aerodynamics. So you need to keep that in mind, um, and just kind of like sort of balance it so you're not skimming on the floor, but of course you've not induced this massive amount of rake by making it as stiff as you can get to stop it from bottoming out. It might be that actually just some ride height adjustments at the rear might be a little bit better. Anti-roll bar on the back is the same as the front, so you've got the same sort of soft, medium, disconnected, and your P settings as well. And just like the same, a P1, sort of P3, and then a soft P1 and soft P7. The next stiffest anti-roll bar is a medium P1, and then all the way up through the P's and then into the hards and then all the way up through there again. So yeah, make small adjustments to your bar rather than like huge sweeping ones. A softer anti-roll bar will give you more grip. More grip at the back means less rotation because you've shifted the balance towards the rear. A stiffer bar will give you less grip but more rotation as well. Right. Well, not last but not least, but we're get onto the dampers then. So dampers, like I could do a video on their own about the dampers, to be honest. But we have low speed and we have high speed. And what we're going to do is we're going to tackle the high speed dampers first. They are totally independent from each other. They affect the car in a totally different way. You don't want to be making adjustments to both, thinking it's going to help the car in a specific area, because it's not. So the high speed dampers is all about how the car reacts to bumps and curbs. The low speed is about how it transitions in and out of a corner. Neither one will affect the other. So a high spring compression. So think of this when you're going along the road. If there is a sausage curb that you're about to attack as a corner, what you do is the tire is going to come, it's going to run over the curb, and it compresses the shock, it compresses the wheel into the chassis. That is when we are talking high speed compression. High speed rebound, wherever we are, high speed rebound is when basically you get above, you've gone over the curb, and now it starts to come back off of the curb, and the, basically the wheel is following the contours of that curb down back towards the road, and it's rebounding back to the ground, so it's extending itself out. That is when rebound damping, high speed rebound damping comes into play. And that is the same on all four corners. They're exactly the same. So when the tire is moving up and in towards the chassis, that is compression. Down away from the chassis, that is rebound on the high speeds. And you will change these, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the tire to follow the contour of a big bump or the sausage curb so that it stays in contact with the road for the longest amount of time. What we don't want to do is we don't want to hit a sausage curb, for example, and have such little damping in there that the wheel gets shoved up into the chassis really quickly, and we actually end up getting the car launches on the way up it because it's just whacked into the chassis straight away. So we fly, as we make contact with it. Um, we also, I mean, that can go in two ways, because we can also have so much damping that the wheel hardly budges, so it has no choice but to fly when it hits it as well. It just smashes into it and just shoots up in the air because it's the only direction it can kind of go. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the damping so much so that it will basically stop the car from reaching its maximum suspension travel, so bottoming out, um, and but they will also be able to follow it at the rate of the curb or the bump, and not be so stiff that, like you say, you're going to get this kind of orbit. Now it's very difficult to check that. You'll kind of know because you'll be like, you'll feel it in the sim. It's like whack. When you whack it, the car will settle down pretty quickly, or you'll barely feel the curb if you've got it kind of absolutely perfect. The more harshly you feel it, then you know that you've probably got the compression damping a little bit wrong. If you feel it hitting the ground again, then it's quite possibly that it's the rebound setting that you've got wrong and you need to adjust the rebound. So this is all about feel, trying to set these up, and very tricky. Now there are advanced tools within, again, VRS, Motec, and Atlas that will help you get your dampers in the right place. They're called damper histograms, and you can use them. You should see a nice smooth graph up and down on your histograms to know that you've got it right. If you've got them all out of alignment and the histograms are all over the shot, then that typically says that they are not in the best average place to deal with all the bumps and curbs on any given circuit or any given lap. The Yeah, so I can't really give you any more advice on terms of high speed dampers on how to set them up, but kind of have a play and know, am I getting this walloping feeling? Let me try both going, up and down, until you find the one that feels a little bit better. And then the same with the rebound when it returns back to the circuit. You don't want it to smash into the ground and bounce back up again, because it's bottomed out, or because there's just no give in the car whatsoever. Um, a flatter circuit will perhaps be more agreeable to more high speed damping. A very bumpy setting will probably be more agreeable to medium damping. A flatter circuit will also be more agreeable to lower damping. So you've just got to have a play, and kind of work that one out. Like I said, for the Academy members, coaches are going to do this for you already, and try and work that out and look at your damper histograms and get them in a good place for you. So this may be one of the few settings that you adjust. Right, now on to low speed damping, and they are very different front to back. The reason being is the low speed dampers affect the way the car turns in to a corner and also out of a corner. But you can set them up independently. So if you want just more rotation on the way in, we can do that with the dampers. But if you want less rotation on the way out, we can also do that with the dampers. We don't have to affect the car on the way in as well as the way out at the same time. So a very, very good suspension tool for us to use in terms of balancing the rotation of the car in specific areas of a corner. Right. So let's talk about on the way into a corner. What dampers affect the way the car transitions into a corner? And that is your front compression and your rear rebound low speed. So low speed rebound on the rear and low speed compression on the front. Now the reason this is, again, let's think this as the sort of like the track, and the front of the car is here, the rear of the car is here. When we are braking into a corner, what we do is that you always see it, the front of the car comes down, so the splitter goes lower to the ground, and the rear of the car comes up, and the wing is higher. So, what we have essentially done is we've changed the aerodynamic profile of the car, and now we have a larger rake angle on the car, and because we have a larger rake angle on the car, it means it's going to turn in more. So, if we want more turn in on going into a corner, what we would do is we would come down on the front compression damping. That would allow the splitter to drop even lower to the ground in the braking zones or on the way in, or when it's under load, as it transitions through corners. It might be you might not brake, it might be the S's of, say, Suzuka, where you go from left to right to left to right, and we're compressing one side. If we're able to allow the splitter on that side to drop even further, that will allow us to have more rotation. It's the same principle. So it's like an aerodynamic um, advantage, but it's all about the rake of the car. The rake has such a huge impact on how the car handles. Um, it does change in terms of suspension as well, um, because when we brake, of course, we load up this front tire a lot more, and we unload the rear tire. And if um, if we have hardly any damping, we're allowing it basically to transition to the point where it's putting maximum pressure on the tire. So the tire is essentially becoming what's absorbing the downforce into the ground rather than the suspension itself. And when we do that, that means we've loaded up this front tire more. So when we load up the front tire more, the balance shifts towards the front. That gives us more rotation. When we unload the rear, which is essentially what we're doing by taking the rebound damping down. So we're saying, yep, we're freely allowing that to come up in the air, the car more up in the air. Um, that will unload this rear tire again, shifting the balance forward. So that's how we can affect the entry. So it affects it both in terms of how much the tires are loaded up, but also aerodynamically as well. And it's much more important in this car than it is, say, like a GT car, because it's huge aero car. So it has a much bigger effect aerodynamically. Um, if you wanted to do it the other way round, if you wanted to go like, do you know what, Alex? The car is great coming off the corner. Like from the middle off, it's absolutely planted. I can sink my foot down on the gas pedal and it don't budge. But on the way in, it's a dog. You know, then what you can do here is you can add some low speed compression damping to the sorry, that was to the rear. I didn't mean to do that. Um, some low speed compression damping to the front. So let's say we'll just go to 7. And I'm going to add a little bit to the rebound on the rear from this 2. I'm going to go to 7 again. And what we have basically done now, again, pretend this is our car here. We have now made it harder for the front end to drop so quickly. So the splitter is not on the ground quite so much, and this rear won't poke up in the air quite so much as well and as quickly. So we have less rake angle, which means we have less rotation through or going into the corner. So we've just stabilized it out. We have also not loading up this front tire as much, and we're not unloading this rear tire as much. So again, mechanically, we have changed the balance of the car. Now, it only has a small effect, Camber. It doesn't have a huge effect, but it certainly is noticeable. So do have a play with that. That's one way you can transition on the way in to a corner. Now, the final 2 settings that we'll discuss are how to affect on the way out of a corner. And we are looking at the low speed front rebound dampers and the low speed rear compression dampers. So completely the opposite. So maybe you need to watch the video a couple of times just to make 100% sure you know what you're doing. Don't go changing low speed compression on the front and low speed compression on the rear, expecting it to change how the car rotates in on the corner, because you're gonna be affecting the way it rotates off the corner with the rear and only in on the way on the front. So you've got to use the two dampers correctly in order. So compression and rebound on the rear, and then for the way in and the way out, it is low speed rebound on the front and compression on the back. Right. So how does it affect on the way out? So it's almost like the stellar kind of opposite. So if we have so say we've got a 4 at the moment, let's just say the car over rotates now on the way out of the corner. We come out and the back end starts to come around, so we've got a little bit too much rotation. Then what we can do is we can say, well, um, we need this front end to basically pop up more when we are coming out of the corner, so that we haven't got such a severe rake, and we want to drop the rear end more so that again the rake is reduced. And we want to unload the front tire a little bit and load the rear tire, so it shifts the balance more towards the rear. Well, a lower amount of damping on the front will do that. When we accelerate a car, the butt of the car squats and the front of the car comes up. You see it with the drag racing, or if you've hooned your own car kind of thing, that, you feel that, that it's not just the G force of acceleration, it's how well, it is that, but yeah, it's the way the suspension sort of squats the car down in there, and that's how you're loading up. So if we allow, by taking the rebound off, if we allow the car to do that, if we're saying, yeah, come up as fast as you can, please, because I've got oversteer, I want to take it off, that will help there. And then if you're saying, yes, squat the rear of the car down, dig into the ground and give me more grip on the rear, thanks, off corners with the low speed compression, then that also helps. Now the car is set up to actually understeer a bit more coming off of the corner. So if it's just on the exit that you're having that trouble where it over rotates, this is kind of the setting that you might be going to. On the way, if it's the other way round, let's say for example, you get given the setup and it's like this, and it understeers like an absolute pig coming off the corner, and you're tracking out all the time. Then what you need to do is you need to basically come back. You need to add some damping into the rear compression, and you need to add some damping to the front rebound. And what that will then do is that will basically try to the front. We're trying to slow the speed the splitter is coming up. And so that means the splitter is going to be lower to the ground. So we're keeping our rake angle a little bit more intact. And because we are reducing the speed that the rear is going to compress down, the rear ride height still is kind of maintained for a little bit longer, again, helping us keep this rake in check. We haven't quite fully unloaded the front tire because the compression is keeping it pushed down and in keeping the weight on that. Every car has like a corner weight, and that's we're trying to keep this corner weight here. If it's say if it's a right hander, it's on this front, it'll be on this front left. If it's a left hander, it's on the front right. So we're trying to keep that weight on that tire, and we're trying not to load up this weight by keeping the damping, making the damping take up some of the load rather than the tire on the rear, so it doesn't shift the balance back towards the rear, and that is how that you can adjust it the opposite way around, so that actually you have more rotation because you kept the rake in check, you've kept the balance more on the or less, should we say, less on the rear. It stays longer on the front, so you don't understeer. And that's how you can use low speed dampers to adjust each part of a corner in and out to how you kind of see fit. Right, guys, that was a long one. I hope you have got something out of it. I'm sure you have many questions. Like I say, in the Discord for the Academy members, ask away. I will not hold back with any of the responses I give you in there. If you're posting in the comments on YouTube and on the iRacing forum, like I say, I'll try and help you as best I can. But yeah, but please note, obviously, we reserve, all the real juicy information for our Academy members. Thank you very much for watching. I'll join you for part 3 of this video, which is all about the brakes and the drive unit. And yeah, we'll wrap this series up. Until then, thanks very much. Thanks for listening. Catch you then.